Good evening, and welcome to the Savannah Book Festival's virtual series. I'm Jonathan Rabb, member of the festival board, and we are delighted to continue the series tonight with Michael Connelly, author of 35 novels, including the number one New York Times bestsellers, The Night Fire, Dark Sacred Night, and his most recent, The Law of Innocence. His books, which include the Harry Bosch series, the Lincoln Lawyer series, and the Renée Ballard series, have sold more than 74 million copies worldwide. Connelly is a former newspaper reporter who has won numerous awards for his journalism and his novels. He is the executive producer of Bosch, starring Titus Welliver, and if you aren't watching it, you need to go and start watching it, and the creator and host of the podcast Murder Book. This event will last about an hour, and Michael Connelly will answer questions submitted during tonight's talk, which should last about 30 to 40 minutes. To submit a question, please click Ask a Question on the bottom right side of your screen and type it in. We will do our best to get to as many of your questions as possible. Welcome, Michael, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I wanted to start off. You're sort of unique in that you've created an entire universe of characters, uh, all peopling LA, um, but you mix and match among your books. I mean, you started with the Bosch books. Did you know at the beginning that you were going to have these other tentacles going out where there would be sort of cross pollination among the characters?
No, not really. I mean, you don't know anything when you're starting out. But I've just always written the way I like to read, and I always love that in books when you see where you come across a character that's from another book and so forth. And so, I like that as a reader, so I do it as a writer. And you never understand or never can know where things are going to go. But I've been very fortunate and been able to keep the pace I keep with the books, and so that really gave me the opportunity to kind of create this mosaic of characters, interwoven stories, and so forth. So you never know who you'll see when you start reading one of the books. It could be someone that you read in a book 12 years ago or something like that. And I know from being a reader that those are great moments. Those are like aha moments, and they're kind of rewards for sticking with a writer. I know all those things from being a reader, and so I practice that as a writer.
Now, do you know which main character is going to be driving the next book? Two books early, one book early, or does that just sort of hit you? You're in the middle of something, and I need to go and maybe do this character for a while.
Yeah, it's pretty close to the time of conception of a book. It's usually I'm writing the book that is next, and while I'm writing that, I get a sense of who I want to write about next. And I don't think too far down the road. This book, because I've been involved in a TV show, I haven't started my next book. I'm going to start it probably next week, and I know who I'm going to write about there, and then I don't know what will ever happen after that. What comes next. My books are pretty contemporary. I try to reflect on what's going on in the world, so it doesn't really pay me to think about who I'm going to write about in 3 years. The world's going to be different. LA is going to be different, and so I try to kind of keep it right to the point of when it's time to start writing to figure those things out.
Well, I mean, yeah, you just mentioned that you like to keep contemporary, and just thinking of this book, when you were writing it, because COVID does play maybe not a significant role, but it's certainly important in the book because Jennifer has to step away, her father, and so forth. When did you know in writing this book that that was going to have to play a role in what you were doing? I mean, you couldn't have anticipated that.
Well, it was when real life circumstances overtook the writing process. Like I said, very contemporary. I usually set the books in the year they're published. And so I was writing this book. I started writing Law of Innocence back in December of last year, and I was setting it in April. Basically, it's a lead up to a trial. Um, and the trial in what I started writing in December was in April. And so I'm going along, I'm writing my book and so forth. And then this pandemic occurs. And in Los Angeles, they closed the courts. So I suddenly realized I'm writing an unrealistic story. There are no courts. And I could have just kept going and I could have written a book that didn't include COVID. But that's not what I've been doing for almost 30 years. I've always been incorporating things that are going on in the world and culture and so forth. O.J. Simpson case was in the books. 9/11 was in the books. So that's how I do it. When there was a major earthquake, Harry Bosch in real life, Harry Bosch's house got wrecked. These are the things that I do. So it would have been wrong for me to just keep writing the book set in April of 2020 and not have COVID. But the problem was, who knew what was going to happen? This was like, in March. Who knew when it would end? There are too many unanswered questions. So what I did was start over. I didn't throw out the book. I had the same story. I just kind of had to recalendar it, if that's a word. I had to move it back, and so it starts right before Thanksgiving of 2019 and goes up to the beginning of March. Which
Well,
is just the beginning of the pandemic, and that allowed me to kind of have this idea that it's the coming plague is coming, and so it's I think it's pretty light-handed, but it's there, and I
well,
think it's realistic of what was going on in those early months.
well, I mean, the great thing in the book is that as Haller sort of discovers and is confronted by it, I remember there's a scene where he's on a plane, or no, or he's on a is he? Yeah, he's on a plane, and suddenly the
Yeah.
person next to him is wearing a mask. It's also one of the things in the book that's fantastic, and I don't know the law at all, but this idea of quick cases that he didn't want it to go on, that was something so important to him. Was that influenced because you knew that the courts were going to be closed and you had to get to the case, or did you always have the idea that Haller wanted to just move this thing along?
Well, it was a little bit of both. I mean, this is not a spoiler. It happens in the first chapter.
Yeah, yeah,
Mickey
yeah.
Haller is accused of a murder. And again, I've written about Haller over the last 15 years, so no one's going to think the question in this book is not, oh, did he do it or did he not do it? I'm not playing that game. It's more like, we know this guy, we know he didn't do it, but he's accused of it, and the drama is, how's he going to get out of this? With is probably the tightest bind of his life, and so that's what I was working with. And so if it's a given that Mickey is innocent of what he's been accused of course he would want to, get to trial, defend himself, and get it over with as soon as possible. So that was part of the book before the pandemic made me back up and start again. This idea that I want a speedy trial, I'm entitled to a speedy trial, and and that also is a strategy because it really puts the prosecution on its heels because they don't have as much time to put their evidence and their case together and so on and so forth. So it was all part of it, and then it just happened to fit really well with the idea that of this coming plague. And Mickey's quite aware that if something like that sweeps around the world or sweeps through this country, the jails are really going to get hit hard, and I got to get out of here before that happens.
Yeah, I apologize for mispronouncing his name because I've always just read it. It's Holler. And I've
Well,
always, no. And the reason that's fascinating to me is because it leads into my next question. You know, we talked about the TV show and Bosch and Titus Welliver, who's fantastic. But what does that do to you as a writer who's been creating these characters? And then, sort of Michael McConaughey comes along and plays the Lincoln lawyer. Um, does it alter the way you go into writing the character once there's an actor who attaches to something that you just came up with yourself?
What's interesting with Holler, and you know what, I don't really know how he pronounces his name because I only wrote it. You know, and then McConaughey started pronouncing it. Um, it's interesting. It doesn't really go to what I do with character, but it does affect the way I write, especially the Bosch show, because in the Bosch show, I mean, in the books, it's 100% Bosch. You're in his head. He's your narrator. You're traveling with him, and you know what he's doing and what he's thinking. When we made the TV show, they said, you know, the creative boss of the show is called a showrunner. The showrunner said, we can't do that because we work, you know, 14, 16-hour days, and we have to spread the storytelling out to other characters because we can't have an actor working every day. You know, we'll kill the poor guy, and we won't get the performance that we want. So we have to we got to breathe life into a lot of your ancillary characters and follow them in the storytelling, and that has influenced me. Um, you know, and in my books, my more recent books often have different characters carrying different stories. Like most recently, Bosch has been teamed up with this other character, you know, Renée Ballard, and the narration goes back and forth. And I think that's a direct influence of working on a TV show or seeing a TV show adapting my books.
It's specifically in this book, you sort of flip the world on its head. I mean, in the ones that I've always read with Mickey Holler, um, you know, he's obviously the one not on the defense, not trying to protect himself. Was that something that you were planning for a while, that you wanted to put him in that kind of peril, in that kind of jeopardy? Or did that just, oh, this will be an interesting thing to do?
It's a little bit of that and some other things. I mean, this is the first Holler book in 9 years, and one reason wasn't writing him too regularly. I wrote about 5 books in, I think, the space of 10 years, actually shorter. And I kind of, you know, when you do legal thrillers, ultimately it's all about the box, the jury room. Everything heads towards not the jury room, the courtroom. Everything heads towards a courtroom, and there's usually one or two outcomes from that. And so to me, it was getting hard to say something new or to tell a new story because they followed a routine. Mickey is either defending someone who did it or someone who didn't do it, you know. And so I kind of stopped writing about him until I thought I would have a new wrinkle or something, a new way of getting into a story about him. And then it occurred to me that, you know, we'll have him accused of the crime, have him, you know, that saying that I think it's belongs to Abraham Lincoln, that, you know, a lawyer who defends himself as a fool for a client. I wanted to kind of take that and examine it and kind of turn it upside down and you know, have Mickey accused of a very serious crime and be in a situation where he's, you know, he's a good lawyer, he knows his stuff. Does he really want to hand his future over to somebody else, or does he want to go for it himself? And you know, if you've read any of the previous books, you know, of course, he's going to defend himself. And so I kind of felt like I had a new take on Mickey Haller, and that's why I went down this route in this particular book.
Well, I mean, going back very, very far, your background is as a journalist, and yet reading these books, your expertise on the law, and I'm talking about the minutia of the law. There are moments in this book, and I'm not going to give anything away, where you know you've got to be so on top of tiny little things that you'll present to a judge or how you deal with evidence. How did you move from being a journalist to someone who has that kind of expertise?
Well, I mean, I've always been fascinated with it. So I've read a lot of books about the law, and I've read a lot of novels about the law. And also, when I was a journalist, I did spend time covering courts pretty extensively. And I was always kind of fascinated by the stuff you're talking about, the minutia, the little moves, that have bigger meaning that you don't really see. That all fascinates me. And then, of course, I have a little cadre of lawyers that help me. You know, the exploits of Mickey Haller are largely true, based on stories told to me by lawyers, and in particular two lawyers that, one of them was my college roommate, and I've always stayed in touch with him. He was a defense attorney. So when I had the idea for this character, I went to him and I said, "Let me be a fly on the wall and watch how you work." And he had a partner, and so I got to watch them both, and they've been with me ever since, helping me with these books. And so I'm quick to say I'm not a creative genius who creates all these, uh, you know, avenues of inquiry and so forth that Mickey Haller goes down. A lot of it comes from real life cases. A lot of it comes from advice. And when I write a first draft of a book, of a Lincoln Lawyer book, the first people to read it are those two lawyers. I send it to them, say, what do I got right? What do I got wrong? What can I get better? What would you say instead of what I have Mickey saying? And I get extensive notes from them, and they make the books way better. I
Yeah.
shouldn't have revealed all that.
No, no,
I
no,
should have
no.
just said, "Oh yeah, it comes out of my head. I'm just so smart." But that's not
But
the way it is.
no, but the smarts is going to the right people to make sure that you're getting it right. And then you turn it into narrative, which changes the game, which they can't do. Although I did read that one of the characters, am I right that Cisco, and I'm not going to even try and pronounce his last name, is actually your real life investigator. Is that right?
Yeah, his name's Wojciechowski, or
Woji, thank you.
some.
Thank you.
It kind of sounds like "Watch Your Car Keys," but yeah, I met this guy actually in a bookstore 25 years ago, and he was a private detective, and his nickname was Cisco, and he was a former biker and all that kind of stuff. Again, I'm revealing I'm not the creative genius. I've taken this guy's life, and he was near retirement age, and so when you say he's my investigator, I don't really investigate stuff, but he's my researcher. So he does a lot of research for me on books, but he does have the experience of being an investigator for a defense attorney, and so like he is one of those people in the cadre of advisors who help me try to get it right in my books.
Yeah, but I mean, it goes so far beyond just getting it right. I mean, there's really this lovely humanity to the characters, each one of them. I mean, it's not as if everybody on the page is just a conduit so that they get the plot point across. You give them each their moments. And in this book, um, I mean, I'm waiting for Holler's daughter to join the firm, and then you can then start writing her books too, because she signs fantastic. But how long do you spend moving, even when you've got a real life source, to creating something that becomes a fictional character on the page? Because they've got to do the things that you need them to do, but in
Well,
very real ways.
yeah, I mean, as you know, as a writer, that bottom line is it comes down to character. So I can surround myself with all these people who do the real work. And like with Bosch, I surround myself with real homicide investigators. Um, and most people who read my books or anyone's books or your books, they don't, um, like, I used to go when we used to have real events. I used to say, "Can I see a show of hands? How many here people have ever solved a murder, or how many people have ever defended a murder suspect in trial?" And it's very few hands. And so where you're going to connect with people, they don't know these worlds, and they're very interested when you can provide what looks like the accurate details of the world, the minutia of it, that and it all adds up to being real. But how they connect is with the character, and and it doesn't matter if it's a homicide detective or a defense lawyer or a reporter or whatever. It's about, you got to connect with the character, and you make those connections through commonalities with everybody. People may not have ever solved a murder, but they've dealt with bureaucracy and the frustrations of bureaucracy. So you show your character dealing with the frustrations of bureaucracy while he's trying to solve a murder, or she's trying to solve a murder. And so that's the trick, and that's the finessing that you have to you know learn and get into your books, and that's how you connect it to readers. And yeah. So it's always, character's always the first thing, and then there's mechanics of the job and the craft and so forth are second to that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I love this because I do this in my own stuff. LA is maybe one of the central characters in every single one of your books. And it's a very specific LA. I mean, you're reading a Michael Connelly book when you get that flavor of LA. Uh, I mean, I know you've lived there for a long time, but how did you create that character to reflect so perfectly all of these disparate characters? I mean, Mickey Haller belongs there, Bosch belongs there. I'm going to mispronounce this. Wojciechowski belongs there. You know, it's tough to have a central character as a place that works for all of these other distinct characters. I mean, how'd you create your LA?
Well, I mean, it is, it's the map that you put your story on. And it's, by the way, Wojciechowski actually lives in Milwaukee, but I transplant him to LA. But it's, again, I mean, everyone always says LA is like a character, but what it really is you use the city to to show the character of your protagonist. And so you find ways of showing how he or she connects, or is disappointed or is in love with places in your in your stories. It's very important. I'm very lucky that, and I didn't realize this when I started. I was a reporter in Los Angeles, so I wrote about Los Angeles, but I didn't realize how much it's a place of intrigue to people around the world. So that really helped me, and put me on the map in many ways. And I comprehended that several books down the road, but that was one of the more lucky things that happened to me
Well, I mean,
with my career.
well, but LA is, at least for at least American film, has been where noir was born. And I'm not, you're not necessarily doing noir all the time, but there is that wonderful feeling of this underbelly that you can turn a corner in LA and find something that you just don't want to find or you don't expect to find. And you manage to bring that so that it makes, as I said, it makes sense for all these other characters.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
it is a place. It's a destination city. People move there. I'm one of them. I grew up in Florida. I tried writing novels twice when I lived in Florida, and it didn't work. And I moved to LA, hoping it would. I mean, that it's the classic LA story. It's not working for you wherever you're at, so reinvent yourself. Try again. Move to Los Angeles, where hopes and dreams can be fulfilled. And I'm lucky that it worked out for me. But for so many people, it doesn't, and that creates a kind of tension and friction in the community that is almost palpable. Sorry, I'm trying to stay out of this blinding light, but it's sunset out here in LA. But anyway, it's yeah. I mean, it's a city where you kind of should look over your shoulder every now and then, because you don't know who's behind you. And that, when it comes to writing fiction, that's fantastic to have that aspect of the location in your stories.
Yeah, I mean, but you say, I was thinking of writing a novel, and I'd like to go back to that in a little bit. But then you said, oh, it's not happening in Florida. The obvious choice is for 99% of people, it's New York, it's Paris. You picked LA, which has always, at least for me, been a film town. And yet you go there to be inspired to write fiction. Did you did you do that on purpose? Did you say, I'm going to go where people don't go? Or was it there's something about LA that drew you?
No, well, it was more movies than books, but most of the books that inspired me were set in LA. It's just kind of weird that I got a job offer to come to LA, and that did the trick for me. That was the inspiration for me to make it happen and make it work. But there's a strong history in Los Angeles. Like, Raymond Chandler. When I
Sure, of
read his
course.
books in Florida, they're primarily the books that made me want to become a writer. Joseph Wambaugh, Ross McDonald. Um, there's just a lot of, and as you said, it's mostly noir, but there's a strong history and tradition in Los Angeles, and which is great, and it's also a huge challenge because if you write a book about Los Angeles, you're going to get compared to these people and the contemporary people that are applying the trade in Los Angeles as well. And that's a good thing to have. I think it's kind of like having competition. It keeps you wanting to do your best and not to mail anything in and be fresh every time out.
Well, now they're all comparing themselves to you because you're the one who's defining LA for sort of the modern reader in terms of this genre. I mean, am I overstating it? But I think that's true.
Well, I have to say, keep overstating because it sounds great,
Done,
but there
done.
are there are lots of people doing fantastic work, and that's the thing. The city is so big. I have just one corner of it. I mostly write about Hollywood and the hills, and then Mickey Haller's downtown because of the courts and so forth. But this place is so big and so sprawling, and there's so many people, uncounted people, and there's many people writing good stuff about LA. I've been very lucky that I'm getting a lot of attention. I've gotten a lot of attention over the years, but there's a strong, I think, new wave of writers that are, plying the trade and writing about LA and following the kind of same path as I did. Not all of them are from LA. Some have just moved out here for the inspiration, and it's working.
So, did you know from early on that you wanted to write novels and then got a journalism job and then or I mean when did you realize this is the path that I want to take? Uh,
Not as early as others. What it was I was a voracious reader. All through high school and stuff. I switched schools a lot, and so I was reading a lot as I slowly would make friends in a new school, that kind of thing. So I had this foundation of reading, and I loved reading crime novels. When I was 16, I was also a witness to a crime. I spent a night with basically sitting next to a detective at a desk and giving statements and things like that. And it just was just so interesting to me. And that fed my reading habit. And then it wasn't until I was 19 and in college that I read all the Raymond Chandler books. And they're the ones that kind of turned my head and made me say, hey, I want to try to do this someday. And the idea of going to, trying to move away from the sun here. No, that's good. The idea of becoming a journalist as a means of getting there, a hopeful means of getting there, came from my parents, who said, because it wasn't like, hey, I didn't come home from college and tell my parents I wanted to be a writer. I said I wanted to be a crime writer, very specific. And so they suggested get a press pass, get a journalism degree, and then you'll get into the world that you hope to write about, and you might experience things and so forth that would prepare you for it. So it was a good strategy, um, and it worked out for me.
those are some pretty smart parents
Yeah.
to come up with that, and obviously very supportive, letting you go out there. I, uh, I, speaking of sort of the trajectory of the career, you're going along, you're writing the Harry Bosch books, everything's great, and you suddenly say, I think I'm going to try something else within this world. What prompted that? What got you to say, you know, I think I'm going to move away from this and create another character that I can play with, and then another. And I'm not that I'm trying to hint, but I really do want the daughter to have her own series. I'm just saying. Uh,
She's well. If I keep writing, the longer I write, the better chance of that happening.
well, she's going
Um,
to graduate soon, so I mean, she's got
yeah,
to have a
yeah,
job.
yeah. Well, Mickey's daughter is in law school, so she'll be ready, and Harry's daughter is the same age. So, but they're both based on my own daughter. But yeah. Now I'm forgetting the initial question
What
about that.
I mean, it took courage to move away from. I mean, to
Oh,
say
that.
I've been doing something that's very successful. I think I'll try some. I'll take it in a different angle. What prompted that?
A couple things. One was my first four books were all about Harry Bosch.
Yeah.
And during that period, I mean, it wasn't an overnight success, but I started having incremental success, and I reached a point after four books that I could quit my day job. And so then the next decision or debate was like, how do I keep it going? And just instinctively, I thought if I only write about Harry Bosch, he's going to burn out for me, or I'm going to burn out. And I just felt that I should, you know, challenge myself, try other things. And at that time, like I said, I quit my day job. So I thought, as kind of a coda on my life as a journalist, I thought I'd write about a journalist. And so my fifth book, popped out a new character in Jack McAvoy in the book The Poet, and that did pretty well for me. That jumped up my profile and my sales and everything. So I suddenly had this proven thing that I don't need to keep writing about one character. I can try other things, and so that's always kind of been the situation.
You're also kind of rare in your ability to go back and forth between third person and first person. And maybe I'm just keying into this now because I just finished, or it's in edits right now. It's the first time I've ever tried first person, and it is really, really hard. Um, but you seem to just be able to go back because the original, I think the early Bosch books are all third person, aren't they?
Right.
And then there's at one point where you did first person with Bosch. Is that right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, but I switched back because I think you're right.
Yeah.
First person is the hardest thing to do, and the I kind of eased into it by writing about a journalist because I was basically writing about myself. So the voice was kind of mine, and so it was easier to make that transition with the poet. And then I did try it with Bosch. Bosch quit the police department for a
Right.
couple of years, and he was going to be a private eye. And I thought, most of the private eye novels that inspired me to want to be a writer were first person. So I thought I should try doing that. And I felt they lost something. I think Bosch is intriguing because you don't know everything he's up to or what he's thinking. You know a lot of it, but you don't know everything. And in first person, that's kind of cheating if you leave stuff out, key stuff out. And so I realized that doesn't work for Bosch. And so after two first person books, I switched back to third. And then with the Lincoln Lawyer, because I had this close friend that I knew since college, and his partner helping me, um, and they were really showing me the nitty gritty of life in the trenches of the justice system. I just always envisioned the Lincoln Lawyer stuff as a confessional of a
That's great.
lawyer who kind of knows how to grease the system. Is kind of I actually pictured like columns out front of a courthouse, and Mickey's behind them, and he's like saying, "Hey, you want to hear about how the justice system really works?" It was like a whispered confession, and that needed to be first person. So that's where that came from. In fact, the first book I turned it in as it was called "The Confessions of a Lincoln Lawyer," and the publisher cut it down to 3 words: the Lincoln Lawyer, left out the confession part. But that's essentially what those books are.
I mean, that's fantastic. That the idea of thinking of something as a confession. God, I got to go back and edit tonight. But
Good luck
but
with
that's
first person. It's tough.
no, it is. I mean, one of the reasons is because you know that there's limited perspective. How do you get so much on the page? And I have to say, in this, the law of, this most recent one, the law of innocence, it's kind of extraordinary how we're able to get inside all of those characters, but it's still Mickey who's telling the story. And he's got a lot of things invested in each of those characters, things that he wants, things that he can't give them. I mean, how did you balance all of those character needs through one guy's perspective?
Well, it was it was an interesting framework for the story that kind of dictated that. And that the challenge to me was I didn't want Mickey to be able to afford to get out of jail, to afford bail. And so for a good part of this book, more than half of it, he's in custody, and he
Right.
takes the bus from the jail. He's bused to the courthouse. So we have him in courtrooms and so forth, but he's essentially strategizing his defense from a jail cell. And which is a big handicap in the first place. So I really wanted him to be in a bad way, and for the reader to wonder how can he ever get out of this. And one way out is to have a good team of people with him. And so it is really Mickey in a jail as the puppet master, I guess, kind of orchestrating what everyone on his team is doing. And I think through his directives and through his interactions with them, whether they're visiting him in jail or in the courthouse or whatever, uh, you get hopefully you get a sense of who they are as characters, and that's again going back to one of your earlier questions. That comes from working on a TV show where there are no throwaway characters, and you have to develop characters so that your main protagonist can take a break from work every now and then, and that's where that's come into my storytelling in the books.
Well, I mean, it really creates this first person creates this wonderful intimacy between the reader and the character, but also I think with the writer. I mean, you're giving me all this information, and especially in a legal thriller, there is a lot, as we talked about, a lot of minutia that you've got to get across. And if it ever feels like you're just handing that to me, I'm going to close the book. You manage to make all of those discoveries that Holler makes himself something that I'm discovering with him. And that's, I mean, structurally, do you set it up and you say, I'm going to take them to here, then I'll give them this little bit of information, then I'll take them here? Because it just felt like everything hits at just the right moment. Or did you just sort of luck into it? I'm pretty sure
I
you
don't know.
didn't.
I probably lucked into it. No, I do know. I do. Going back to the Confessions of a Lincoln Lawyer, I do love that Mickey knows what he's doing and he's experienced a lot of stuff, and so he can think. What I love most about him is he's thinking two or three moves ahead of the prosecution, so he knows what they're going to try to do, and he takes the time to explain that to the reader, usually through explaining it to one of his staff or part of his team. Um, but it doesn't always have to be that way because it is first person, and he's talking to you, the reader. And I think that's one of those connecting points. That's about character, to know your craft, to know the land that you're in, and to know it so well, is really important. And I know I create this guy and I write about him, but I also can stand outside the box and look at him, and that's one of the things I admire most about him.
There's also, I mean, you said at the very beginning, look, we know, and you didn't want us to think, he's been accused of murder. Is he going to, we hope we know how it's going to work out. But one of the things that we're not so sure about in the book, and I think this is wonderful, is really where his moral compass is. Um, what's he going to be able to do? Because now the stakes are so much higher. It's not someone else. This is him. And did you purposefully give him some really tough moral situations, not just in terms of the law, but in terms of the relationships with the other people, the women who come into his life, that sort of thing? Was that all percolating when you went into this, or did it all just sort of make sense to have this kind of moral ambiguity about everything that's going on in the book?
Yeah, I mean that's sorry, keep getting away from the sun. It's in all the books. I love that you say his moral compass, and I think that's always in question. But often we see him through the books that he finds the way to do the right thing, and sometimes it's cutting corners, or sometimes it's doing questionable things, but ultimately he's trying to do the right thing. And it's a little different with this book because he's the guy who's accused of the crime. And as I said before, I'm not trying to trick the reader into wondering if he did it or not. It's a given he didn't do it, from the very first chapter, and it's more like the contraption he's in and how can he get out of it. Um, but I think the when you're in this kind of field, whether you're a prosecutor or defense attorney, the moral questions are right there in front of you. Most people who go to work and so forth, me as a writer and so forth, I don't have to confront that kind of stuff. on a daily basis, and someone like Mickey does, and it has a tendency, I think, to wear you down in some places, to kind of sand off hard edges and so forth. And that's what I like watching Mickey deal with, and hopefully readers are the same way.
Well, but you bring those same questions, but in a very different way to Bosch. I mean, his sense of what's right, what's wrong. I mean, I remember I think one of the first books I read, he shoots someone right out of the gate, and the question is, was this justified? Was it not? And there's a very different moral approach or approach to morality that he has, and yet both these characters are playing sort of different sides of the same coin. Did you feel when you moved to Holler that you were able to play with a different side of the morality question, or are they intertwined in the way that you look at it?
Well, they're intertwined for sure, but they are different in many ways. So Harry Bosch. Also, Harry Bosch is. I've been writing about him for going on 30 years now. So it also depends on where you catch Harry Bosch in the
Right.
books. He certainly was a black and white character. The world is black and white, and through 3 decades, I think he's moved to the gray. But Mickey Haller from day one has always been in the gray area. It's a certain outlook that he has that would lead him to be a defense attorney as opposed to being a prosecutor. You're dealing with ideas about being an underdog, ideas about, whether the justice system is pure, and treats people equally. All those things go into Mickey's outlook, and they have to go into his outlook. And whereas Harry Bosch doesn't have to have that, he gets into it at times. But he's a guy who, there's a crime and there's a murder, I'm gonna find out who did it, and that's his springboard. Um, Mickey's is quite different, and I would say it's funny. I think Harry Bosch is probably, he might get mentioned on my tombstone. I doubt Mickey Haller will, but I think Mickey Haller ends up being the more interesting character because of these kind of conflicts of morality and embracing the gray areas of the justice system.
Yeah, but even in this book, when Bosch makes an appearance in this book, and he's significant to a certain point, it's a different Bosch than I read years and years ago, and it's a
Yeah.
different Bosch than that I'm getting right now from the TV series. It's there's a it's not black and white anymore. He maybe wants to bring that to it. Has Holler in some way influenced the way you look at Bosch himself now?
Yeah, both as me as a writer and also in the books. You know, it was a kind of a difficult thing. This is not giving stuff away, but Mickey's accused of murder in this book, and he basically needs all the help he can get because he's stuck in jail trying to defend himself. He's got a lot of enemies from many years of working in the same courthouse where he's going to be tried. A judge jacks up his bail because Mickey had appealed a case and a couple cases and beat the judge. The judge was reversed. The judge held a grudge. So he's got a lot of stuff going against him. And so I wanted to bring everybody in to help him. And so you have Bosch come in. You even have his ex-wife, um, Maggie McPherce, who's a prosecutor and takes a leave to help him. And I didn't want to spend a lot of time with each one of these characters trying to figure out, did he do it or did he not? Because I think we all have sense of the people in our lives and the people we can trust and so forth. And so they all kind of pitched in, and we go over pretty quickly. Bosch knows he couldn't have done this. Maggie knows he couldn't have done this. And the only one who might have some doubt is actually Jennifer. And that's just, I just didn't want to spend a lot of time the did he not among people that are close to Mickey, because by now they must know who this guy is. And so for Bosch, sorry, this is a long way of running away from your question, I think. But for Bosch to come to that point and say, you know, I'm here for you. What do you need me to do? Without going into like, I know you didn't do it and all this stuff, or did you do it? Assure me you didn't do it, and I'll work for you. I didn't need to do all that stuff, and that I think underlines what you're saying in your question 25 minutes ago about
No,
Bosch's being in the gray area. Yeah, he's a dweller in the gray area for sure at this stage of his life and in my writing of his life.
but I will say, and maybe I just read it this way, but it seemed to me in this book that the person that Mickey Holler was most eager to make sure knew he was innocent was Bosch. I mean, there's that wonderful moment when I'm not going to give anything away, but it just felt that it was almost as if this meant more to Holler, that Bosch believed him than anybody else. Was
Well, I
that
think
part of it?
that's an astute observation. Yeah, you're talking about at a restaurant before they
Yeah,
sit down
yeah.
with the team. And I played around with that. I wasn't even sure I should even do that because of stuff I just said that I
Oh,
think Bosch may
so
jump on
good.
it. But I just thought, they're half brothers. They've opposed each other in books. They've worked together for each other. Mickey's done some really good turns for Harry in his retirement and so forth. And in the previous book to this, Harry saves the day on the case for Mickey. So it's gone both ways, and I think they have a shorthand. But I think of everyone on Mickey's team, Bosch is the outsider, and there's even some friction between him and Cisco. Um, I think Mickey just didn't want to fully immerse him in the team if he wasn't 100% sure. And so that's what the little check at the door of the restaurant is like, the check with him and make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, but it's a great. I mean, I always think of it. It's a great breath at that moment in the book where the reader just sort of has to take something in that's going to build momentum down the road. And even if we know that Mickey didn't do it, we're also sitting there for the rest of the book going, come on, Bosch, come on. He didn't do it. And I thought that was just wonderful. Anyway, I have a number of questions from you for the last 10 minutes or so from people who've been
Oh,
listening. So I'm going to just dive in. This one is from Milo Moore. We have read all your books and love them. That's always a good way to start a question.
yeah.
The streaming Bosch series character seems grumpier, with less humor than in your Bosch books. Do you agree?
Um, yeah, maybe. You mentioned this earlier. The Bosch in the TV show is behind the curve of Bosch in the books, and Bosch is lightened up in the books mostly because of his daughter, and especially in the last 5 or 6 books. And on the show we haven't even gotten to them. In the show he's still got a badge, and so that has a certain amount of constraints on personality for anybody, including Harry. And it's after Harry gave up his badge in the books, and his relationship with his daughter deepens, that I think he becomes more humorous, but he also sees the humor in the world and the randomness of the world more and better, and so he can thank his daughter for that. And then we haven't gotten there yet in the TV show, and I guess we never will, or we're going to try to convince um, people to let us keep going, and hopefully we'll get to a point where Bosch will be funnier. But even we're talking about degrees here. Bosch overall is not like a happy-go-lucky guy, and I don't think he ever will be, just because of he's been through too much darkness, I think, to ever be like a honey I'm home type of guy.
This one comes from Joe Grabius. Can we expect to see a TV series on Amazon or Netflix around Mickey Holler or Renée Ballard?
Well, the quick answer is I hope so. And I'm working on those. The Bosch show is pretty successful, and so that has made other companies and production houses and so forth come to me and say like, "What else have you got?" So I'm working on those things, and I think the Lincoln Lawyer we'll see again. I don't know. I doubt it will be Matthew McConaughey, but I think we're going to see him again, probably on television in the not too distant future.
It's
And
great.
then Ballard, I think is a great character for these times, and hopefully somebody in Hollywood will figure that out and agree.
This one comes from Jane Davis. You've given Harry Bosch a love of jazz. Does Mickey Holler have a music genre he prefers?
I've kind of dropped the ball with him. In the first book, he was all about rap, and not because he necessarily liked it, but a lot of his clientele liked it and took a lot of their social cues and beliefs from it. So he wanted to understand that. And so the first book has a lot of like Tupac Shakur in it. And then I kind of pulled away from the music, which was a mistake. I mean, I really think characters should have a musical identity, and I keep dropping the ball on that because I already have so many plates I'm spinning when I'm writing a legal thriller that I often forget about it. And it's a crime really because where's the guy's office? It's in a car. He could be listening to music all the time, and I just haven't gotten around to doing that. That's a good reminder from Jane Davis, whoever that is.
uh, she'll take a little royalty on the next
Uh,
book. I mean, I'm just going to throw that in there. This one comes from Bob Smith. Holler's ultimately successful defense requires the efforts of a number of people and quite a bit of money. Was this a point you were attempting to make? Ooh, about our justice system.
um, I think the point I'm trying to make, I mean, I'm not a guy who wants to be didactic about everything. I think you don't need to read a book or hear me to know that our justice system has some flaws. But what the construct is an underdog story. Somebody who's really standing by himself in front of this massive might of the state. There's a scene in one of the books where he's in the civic center and surrounded by courthouses and police stations and the federal building, and these are the physical things that are lined up to crush him and crush anybody accused of a crime. And and that's an underdog story, especially if you haven't committed the crime, as we know from the very beginning of this book. And so, that's all I was trying to do, to try to make this a very difficult journey for him, but to to know and to imbue him with these skills that if anyone's going to get out of this, it's going to be him. And of course, he can't do it by himself because he's stuck in jail for most of the book. He needs all these people around him, and and he has to be aware of what the prosecution's up to. He's got to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of them, and he's got a plan for what they're going to do, and all that adds up hopefully to a intriguing and interesting story that keeps readers turning the page. And if you do that, that's what I want to do. I'm not putting this book out there as any kind of statement about the justice system has to be changed. That's a statement we all already know.
This one comes from Martha Welsh. How did you and Titus Welliver meet and form your Bosch collaboration?
Well, I guess it was 7 or 8 years ago, we were trying to cast the show, and we talked to many many actors. I had seen Titus in a show where he played a military vet with post-traumatic stress syndrome, and he did it so well without dialogue. He was able to project inner damage, and that's what we were looking for in Harry Bosch, because in the books you're inside his head and you know a lot about what he's thinking, what hurts him, what disappoints him, and you know a lot about what he's carrying. And when you shift from a book to a screen story, a scripted story, you don't go inside anyone's head. And so that was the big jump we had to make. We had to find an actor who could project this stuff. And when Titus came in and read a scene, he tried out for the part. He got it pretty much right on the spot. We chased him out to the parking lot to bring him back in to tell him that we want him to be Harry Bosch, and it was the right call. I just think he's been fantastic.
This is the last question. This comes from Tim Lindgren. I've read all of your books, and although fiction, you're a stickler for detail when it comes to specific locations in LA, restaurants, and so forth. Tim says, I tend to Google Earth references to places, and it's refreshing to know that all of these locations exist. Do you yourself know all of these locations inside and out?
I don't know about inside and out, but I do a lot of what I call physical research. I go to the places that I write about. I mean, and that's probably why I go back a lot to the same places over and over. Like Mickey always works out of the same courthouse for the most part, for example. And yeah, I mean, that's the old reporter in me, but it's also, I'm writing about people that don't exist. They're Harry Bosch and Haller and Ballard. They're made up. But if I can plant their feet in a real place and get it, the details of that place as correct and accurate as possible, I think that helps. Is this kind of a pejorative word, but to sell it, to connect it to people. I started writing about Bosch before there was internet, so never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be writing stories and people would be Googling things because I'll be the first to say I get some stuff wrong, and so I'm happy that reader hasn't hit upon them with his Google searches, but I'm also proud that people can do that and find like there is a Musso and Frank's and there is these places because it doesn't matter to the reading process. I don't think you can make these things up. It doesn't really matter, but it definitely matters to me. It takes me about 10 or 11 months to write a book, and just using these real places and being able to have them readily in my mind and in my imagination really helps me write the book. So it's about the writing process more than the reading process, but I love it when readers do understand that this is the real LA.
Look, I mean, the more real the world is, the more real the characters are going to feel inside of it. I mean, and that's clear in all of your books. Well, thank you, Michael. This has been fantastic to get inside, see not just this book, but all of the books going back almost 30 years. So thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me, and good luck with the Savannah Book Festival.
And when we're in person, we'd love to have you come to Savannah. It's beautiful here. We even have restaurants here as well, so you could try that.
Yeah, I've only been there once in my life, so I'd like to get back.
Please,
In
we'd
person
love to have
next
you.
time. Yeah, in person.
We'll make sure it happens.
Okay, and thank you for your questions and keeping it going and interesting.
Pleasure. The pleasure was mine.
Take care, everybody.
And to our audience, thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you'll join us in January for Pulitzer Prize winning author Jane Smiley. You can go to savannahbookfestival.org for event information. And the Savannah Book Festival wishes all of you a very happy holiday season. Good night.